Welcome to ORDIO. We are the audio and podcast division of OR Books. I'm here with Jules Boykoff, who is OR's newest author. Jules is a scholar and sports writer and professional football player, soccer player. Your book, Red Card, is about FIFA and corruption and FIFA's involvement in politics and sports washing. So it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Anna. It's a joy to be with you today.
Great. Obviously, you're a former professional soccer player. What's it like to go from playing soccer to then this whole career of analyzing soccer and the sports industry?
I'm actually glad that you're starting there because I would like to make it clear from the outset that I do love soccer. I spent a big chunk of my life playing soccer. I still follow soccer. I've seen how soccer can build community, camaraderie. I've seen how soccer can convert friends into comrades fighting for politics. I've been involved in those kind of struggles. So it's an important thing for me, and I think that's a foundation for this conversation, is that I think that football is worth fighting for, soccer is worth fighting for, despite the fact that powerful people like FIFA, the world's governing body for soccer, and President Donald Trump are trying to basically steal the people's game and use it for their own advantage.
Why does soccer have this kind of connection to this people's game? Where does that come from?
Well, it's just enormously popular, in part because it doesn't take a lot to play the game. You need a vaguely round kind of object in a little bit of space that's relatively flat. Doesn't even have to be perfectly flat. I've played on places with trees growing up right in the middle of the pitch. Kind of was fun, actually. So that's, definitely part of it. I was struck recently. I was in Bosnia. I was in Sarajevo, and I went to a museum of genocide, and there were stories there of people. Literally, there was an exhibit that said "Soccer saved my life," and there was exhibits about people hovering around the television in 1994 during the siege of Sarajevo, when they were living in a camp together, watching Roberto Baggio and hoping he was going to do well. There were also soccer balls that they made themselves out of socks and other pieces of clothing they'd stuff in there. So I think that's part of it. You just need a round ball and you can get some friends together and play. You can also play with big numbers of people, 11 aside or even more if you wanted, and you can play 5 aside, 3 aside, so there's that.
For someone who doesn't follow sports, they might look at this book and the politics around soccer and say, why is this important? It's soccer, it's a game. Why is soccer actually relevant, even to people who don't follow sports?
Well, first, I wrote it for those people in part. I wanted it to be an invitation to those who don't follow football or soccer maniacally, but want to understand what's happening in North America this summer and all the fervor and even anger around the tournament. And so I wrote it for people that don't necessarily follow the sport. I guess I also did write it for people who do follow the sport and who are open-minded enough to think critically about the sport that they might love. And I guess third, I would also say it's for leftists who want to get a handle on the leftist political history of FIFA and the Men's World Cup as a groundation for understanding the World Cup that we're seeing this summer. So for people who, in that first group, who are those who really don't follow the sport at all, I hope that they'll at least be interested in the political ramifications of some of the findings that I came up with in the book, which is to say, authoritarians use the sport of soccer to their political advantage and have been doing so for nearly a century when it comes to the Men's World Cup. And so it's worth watching what they do and how they do it, because the conclusion is not foretold. Their success as authoritarians using sports is not foretold. There's a political struggle involved, and if you actually understand the situation, it makes it easier to get involved in the political struggle to fight back against the underbelly of this beloved game.
You kind of go over the history of FIFA and focus on a few different examples, and the term that comes up a lot is sportswashing. Can you tell me, what is sportswashing?
Sportswashing is when political leaders use sports to deflect attention from chronic social problems or human rights woes at home, while making themselves look legitimate or important on the world stage, and setting themselves up for political gain, economic gain, sometimes diplomatic gain. So it's this really interesting process of deflection and then gain.
What happened with the Russian World Cup or Qatar? How did those rulers use the World Cup to their advantage.
Yeah, maybe I'll go with the most recent one, the Qatar 2022 World Cup, since it might be more fresh in the mind of people. There was actually quite a kerfuffle around that tournament. So Qatar sunk billions upon billions into building stadiums for that tournament in the hopes of bringing people from around the world to enjoy the country and maybe come back and revisit those hotels where they stayed and have their tourism industry start to flourish, thereby helping them diversify their economy. In a sense, it became what David Harvey called a spatial fix. You have all this capital that you've gotten from the fossil fuel economy, and to keep it active, you were able to plunge it into sports. So what did they get out of it? In a way, you could argue that the 2022 World Cup in Qatar worked, in the sense that it worked on an international audience who now goes to Qatar, notwithstanding the recent blip with the Iran war and less people going. But you can see their tourism numbers have gone up over time. Or also, they've actually become more of a diplomatic force in the region, go-to diplomat in times of trouble. That was something that was happening before the World Cup, but has certainly been bolstered after the World Cup. So you could argue that this was a quote-unquote successful sports wash. What were they deflecting attention from? Well, the kafala labor system that is extraordinarily exploitative for migrant workers who hand over their passports. It's very difficult to change jobs. According to one report from The Guardian, 6,500 people died in the years leading up to the World Cup, migrant workers working under incredibly perilous conditions. But if they could get the world to forget about that and instead think about what a wonderful host they were for this soccer tournament, then they could achieve their goals.
You mentioned the case of like the Argentinian dictatorship too, how they also use the World Cup. I know there's been a lot of coverage of like mass housing displacement in Brazil and now in Mexico. What happens to a city when FIFA kind of comes to town?
Well, first, when FIFA starts talking to these cities and these cities are saying, let's do this, I mean, it's all rainbows and unicorns and everybody's going to make bank and it's going to be fun. But the closer you get to the actual tournament, the more that people in cities realize that they've kind of gotten themselves into a hoodwink here. The basic model, I guess the business model of FIFA, is to socialize the costs onto host cities and countries and to privatize the benefits. And we're seeing that with this World Cup in Technicolor. I mean, if you look at the fact that all policing costs are bore by local cities and also the federal government. So if you're a federal taxpayer in the United States, you're helping pay for security through the quote-unquote Big Beautiful Bill Act that gave more than $600,000 for World Cup security.
600 million, right?
600 million, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. 600 million, 625 million to be precise. So there's that. There's also the fact that if you're the host, you provide all the safety like fire there. You provide all the people that help people get to where they need to go. You run the fan zones as well. You also do things like organized transportation. All those are incredibly difficult to monetize. The fan zones now, they're starting to charge tickets, and that's causing disgruntlement because there was a promise that they were going to be free. On the flip side, who walks away with the bag? It's the private entities involved. There's the broadcasters of the World Cup that walk away with loads of money. There's the corporate sponsors of the World Cup that do really well. There's FIFA itself that I know is technically a nonprofit organization, but for a nonprofit, it's extraordinarily profitable, and they do very well, as does the president of FIFA himself, Gianni Infantino, who just got a raise this year to $6 million a year. So that's the fundamental business model. But it's based on a series of myths that are fed to the public at the outset. Myths that gloss over the things you were talking about, such as the displacement of unhoused residents, gentrification in the city. There's also greenwashing involved, like big green sustainability promises where they're not followed through. The front end, there's big promises, but the backside, the follow-through is often extremely lacking.
You write that this year's World Cup is kind of slated to make even much more money than the last one. Where does this money go? Where do these billions and billions of dollars go?
Well, if we were talking to Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA here, the first thing he would say is it goes back into soccer. And there is truth to that. They plunge millions upon millions of dollars back into football itself by giving it to these football associations, or FAs as they're called, around the world. And they give out those millions to those FAs. And then they can do grassroots soccer, theoretically. The problem is those millions that are given to these various football associations around the world has very little transparency, but that's a separate issue. So it goes back into the game. It goes into making sure that FIFA can live the lavish lifestyle they become used to. And like, so Gianni Infantino not only gets a $6 million salary, but he travels wherever he wants to travel. He flies around in jets. He's hanging out with the richest people around the world, speaking at these various events like Davos, etc. If you're not Gianni Infantino and you're not the president of FIFA, but you're on the powerful FIFA Council, that's 37 people, you make between $250,000 and $300,000 a year for basically attending 2, maybe 4 meetings. They'd probably say they do more work than that, but hey, that's really good work if you can get it. So that's where the money goes as well. It also goes to payouts to some of the teams that are involved. Well, all the teams get a small payout, but the further you advance in the tournament, the more your payout is. So the players get some too. In fact, they last minute increased the amount that players were getting because there was some disgruntlement about how they weren't getting enough.
Given, I mean, these like many documented problems and costs to the local governments, why do cities and why do countries still bid for the World Cup? Like, isn't it obvious that this is more expensive than maybe what it's worth?
Well, I think it's largely because if you look at where the bids come from, they tend to come from well-connected political and economic elites. There is money swirling through this system. It just happens to swirl upwards into the pockets of people who are already quite full. I mean, you could call it trickle-up economics, the sort of model of these sports mega events like the World Cup, but also the Olympics. So if you're a political leader and you know you're not going to be in office when the World Cup rolls around, why not give it a go? You can say that I got the World Cup to Atlanta, I got the World Cup to Kansas City, and that'll give you a little bit of a boost. Some politicians try to use this as sort of political trampoline for their futures. But then you have the well-connected people in the construction industry, other industries that see it as an opportunity for profit as well, and they lend their expertise and sometimes their money to putting forth bids and bidding. So that's part of it. The other reason, though, is just they bid because they want to engage in sports washing. I mean, if you look to Saudi Arabia in 2034, they're keen to take their oil money and plug it into different places to make it useful and keep their capital active. And so they can benefit tremendously on a reputational basis where people won't be talking about Jamal Khashoggi, they'll be talking about Saudi Arabia and the World Cup.
You've talked about what FIFA puts in these contracts, basically. Can you give me an overview of everything from the taxes exemptions to the limitations on how stadiums can decorate themselves? Like, what is FIFA requiring from local governments in order to host them, basically?
Yeah, I think it kind of boils down to 2 central dynamics. One is just monomaniacal brand protection. I mean, you have to take the names, the corporate names of your stadiums and lift them off, scrub them free of all the other corporate sponsors so they don't interfere with FIFA's corporate sponsors. The other thing is the dynamic that we identified before, where the public pays and the private entities profit. So those are the 2 main guiding principles in a lot of these contracts. Now, the last time the United States hosted the World Cup was in 1994. There was an umbrella group that signed on behalf of all of the host cities. And they got a much better deal then in 1994 than they did this time, when each city negotiated an individual contract with FIFA and their phalanx of lawyers that made sure that FIFA got the best deal possible. And even then, in 1994, despite the fact they had better contracts, 9 of the 13 host cities hemorrhaged money, like billions upon billions in losses. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of cities these days realizing they're going to lose millions of dollars from hosting this tournament in 2026. They're just examples abound of public money that's been pumped into these endeavors. So the contracts themselves, they, in my opinion, they should be public information. If your host city is signing a contract with FIFA, that should be on the website of your city so all can see. But it's like very difficult to get your hands on these documents. They make it as difficult as possible. And in some cases, like Los Angeles, big soccer city, where there was a jurisdictional question, so they built up this sort of private entity to run it instead. Well, you can't get that information at all because it's a private entity and they can call it proprietary, and you can't use FOIA laws, Freedom of Information laws, to get access to it. So there's a lot of levels to this, but I'd say when you look at the contracts, and some cities have issued them, it's ridiculous in terms of how much FIFA is willing to protect their brand.
So the city of Los Angeles built a private company?
They created, I think it was an LLC to just like oversee the World Cup. And it was amazing because they were talking to FIFA about the contract. And at one point, reportedly, somebody asked, like, well, what do we get out of this? Like, what are we getting? And reportedly, somebody from FIFA said, oh, hosting this tournament is going to put Los Angeles on the map. Because, no one's heard of Los Angeles, right? I mean, I have a lot of things to say about Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, and they're not nice things either, I will say. But he had the good sense of saying no to FIFA. When he looked at these contracts, he just said, what are we getting out of this? We're getting nothing. In fact, he said in an interview recently that one of the stipulations in the contract for Chicago that FIFA was floating was that they'd be willing to fork over the cost to build a dome over Soldier Field if necessary. Like, that's huge amounts of money, and that's huge amounts of control by FIFA. So even Rahm Emanuel said it was a bad deal, and that's why you're not seeing any matches in Chicago this summer, despite the fact it's a massive soccer city.
Wasn't there also something where FIFA kind of prioritizes its own sponsorships, meaning that cities can't, if there's a beer sponsorship with FIFA,
right,
the city can't have also one? So
that's exactly right. So FIFA has numerous levels of sponsorship, and they pay millions upon millions of dollars to have that sponsorship. And that means you can't have locals interfere. I mean, I saw a photograph from one of the press centers at one of the matches of this World Cup, and FIFA had apparently gone to the trouble of taping over the brand names of ketchups that weren't involved in the sponsorship of the tournament. That's the micromanagement that we're talking about here. It is totally maniacal.
Even seeing the stadiums is so strange because they just put it looks like paper. They just papered over the name of whatever stadium it is. So it's just
yeah.
I think MetLife was one example.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think these corporate entities should have their names on the sides of these stadiums anyways. I've always found it kind of unbecoming, and it's not like they built them, they're just paying millions to have their name along the side.
Yeah.
So it doesn't bother me too much not being able to see these corporate behemoths, but at the other side, it costs money to do that, to cover up the names, or even to just take the actual names off piece by piece.
Was looking at a jersey recently, and it only has, it doesn't even have the name of the team, it's just the name of the company that's sponsoring it. So when the US first bid for this, and it was during Trump's first term, and now it's obviously, he almost had an advantage by skipping one term, and now he's getting able to kind of reap the benefits. There's been a lot of talk of US politics now, and especially with immigration and how that's been impacting fans and teams. Can you tell me a bit about what's going on with teams and their ability to actually access the World Cup?
Well, President Trump, as you said, was president when they put forth the bid in 2017, but there were people zipping around to the voting members of FIFA saying, don't worry, he's not going to be here for the World Cup. If he gets reelected, then he'll play it straight through and he'll be gone by the time 2026 rolls around. Little did they know that he would be here. That was one of the arguments to vote for the USA, Canada, Mexico bid, was that Trump wouldn't be there. Since then, he has utterly demolished the spirit of what this event is supposed to be like. He has twisted it into his own private destruction machine, in the sense that he has excluded a lot of people. That's the big paradox of this World Cup. It includes 48 teams, which is more teams than ever before. So that's all about including more teams. But on the flip side, the Trump administration's policies are excluding people left and right. There's the immigration policies around players having to pay $15,000 to get a visa. We saw this with the goalkeeper, the lovely 40-year-old Vozinha is his name, goalkeeper from Capo Verde, who didn't have his mother at the game because she would have had to have paid, he said, $15,000 to get a visa, and then it would have been only returned had she returned and not overstayed her visa. So that's kept a lot of people away. It's exclusion, even just the cost for the tournament, because the ticket prices are so high. But a lot of people are staying away, quite frankly, because of the fact that Immigration and Customs Enforcement has been running through the United States, wearing masks like they just robbed a liquor store, and marauding and attacking and even killing people on the streets of the United States, U.S. citizens. They've been jailing, detaining Native Americans in this country. The levels of irony there is just almost too much to behold. And then, of course, people who've immigrated to this country are being racially profiled and treated incredibly poorly. If you're a person from another country and you're seeing all that happen on your phone at home, watching it, why would you take the chance to come to the United States? Especially if you're a racialized person, but not necessarily only. We've had white tourists from Canada and find themselves in detention for long periods of time. People from Ireland who are white and white presenting. Germany. A lot of people looked at this tournament and said no thanks. The country that said no thanks the most actually is Spain, where according to the most recent data I've seen, they have 28% less people attending this World Cup than the previous one. That's a pretty sharp decrease, and I think it speaks volumes. They're Spanish speakers, and you know that ICE is just picking people up based on them speaking Spanish in the streets. It's put a real pall over this tournament.
I was reading that the government of Senegal was paying for tickets for Senegalese people in the US to attend the games because they knew that people would not be able to fly from Senegal to attend games in the US. It's really like farcical, no?
Yeah, and even those folks aren't safe. I mean, that's the thing. And I think you bring up a really important point, Anna, is that it's not just the visitors from abroad that could be in danger by coming here and that are realizing that, but it's local people in the host cities that live there already who might like to come together, pockets of people from Haiti and in Ohio, Bosnians who might like to come together in Portland, Oregon and watch together. And those are cities where there aren't World Cup games, so they could actually become magnets for ICE. While all the global media over here at all the major host cities, ICE can do the job over here. In fact, we've seen evidence that they've increased their efforts in Washington, D.C., a place that's not a host city during the World Cup.
And the administration has said very clearly that ICE will be at the stadiums, right? Do you know
Yes.
what form that will take?
So the acting director of ICE many months ago said that ICE would play a key role at this World Cup. That's a quote, key role. We've always wondered what that will be. Homeland Security investigations, which is an element of ICE, has been at numerous big sporting events in the past. They were also at the recent Winter Olympics in Italy. So we know they're there doing some sort of investigating, but we actually don't know what role they're going to play. And in fact, when Mark Wayne Mullen, the head of Department of Homeland Security, was interviewed just before the tournament and asked, well, are you going to be engaging in mass detention? What are you actually going to be doing with ICE? He wouldn't take anything off the table. He was very clear that everything in terms of immigration, customs, and enforcement was absolutely on the table. So we actually don't know. Now, if we dip into the history that you were talking about before, whether it's Argentina in 1978, whether it is Mussolini hosting the World Cup in 1934, whether it's Russia in 2018, the repression tends to dial down during the actual event of the World Cup and then get cranked back up afterwards. So if Trump were to follow the historical trend, then we might see less ICE involvement during the tournament. The only problem is we're talking about the most erratic president who has been maniacally putting ICE out into the streets no matter what the conditions. Quite a bit of a wild card when it comes to that historical pattern.
It's been interesting seeing how Infantino has been kind of navigating and fostering this very close relationship with Trump and the federal government, but then treating the cities and like local governments pretty dismissively. But such a contrast, and political contrast.
Yeah, I mean, Gianni Infantino is sycophantic at the molecular level. He has a long-running history of being sycophantic, obsequious, and otherwise kiss-ass. I mean, this guy, he, ahead of the 2018 Men's World Cup in Russia, played football on the Red Square with Vladimir Putin and some other stars of the game. Unfortunately, people like even Ronaldo, who I always loved from Brazil, out there on the Red Square. In 2022, he moved residents to Qatar to run interference for them on what we were talking about before with the humanitarian crisis around migrant workers. Try to downplay it then. And now this World Cup, he's taking that sycophancy to the next level. I mean, he is literally renting space at Trump Tower in New York City. He is literally living in Florida, 70 miles down the road from Mar-a-Lago, so he can be there close to the president as needed. He even attended the opening of Melania. That's how much he's pushing to be in Trump's inner circle. He spent more time in the White House than any elected leader in the world. So he is making absolutely sure in doing all that FIFA's money spigot remains wide open. And that is goal number one for him. I would also add, he does seem to genuinely, I don't know for sure, I don't know Infantino, but he does seem to genuinely like Trump. They both have a penchant for political spectacle. They both have a penchant for being the center of attention. They both have a penchant for living the good life and being around rich people. So they do seem to sort of share quite a bit. But I would say the main reason, if you want to understand Infantino's actions in general, it's a follow the money escapade.
You wrote and researched this book before the World Cup started, and I'm wondering if you're seeing things differently from when you were writing the book, or things surprising you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there has been some interesting protest efforts against this event. that are ongoing outside of stadiums. There's one planned for the 21st of June in numerous host cities around the issue of climate change and greenwashing. I figured it was going to happen. They said they were going to do it, but it's been a little bit bigger early in the tournament than I expected. I was surprised, not in a good way, by the fact that Omar Abdul Qadir Artan, a referee from Somalia, was excluded from the tournament. They said he had connections to people involved in terrorism, the U.S. State Department said.
And didn't present any evidence.
Of course not, never presenting any evidence, just maligned the man's name in public. He was the referee of the year on the men's side from Africa in 2025, so a decorated referee. I hardly think some referee is going to, come and try to carry out some kind of act against the United States when they're living their dream actually as a referee. But that doesn't matter to facts like that, to the Trump administration. And I was honestly quite disappointed I was not only surprised that happened, but disappointed that the referees didn't stand in solidarity with him and say, come on, this is ridiculous. And the last thing I would say really quick, if I may, is just that one thing that surprised me was the sort of performative security culture and theater, really, around the teams from Uzbekistan and Senegal when they arrived and they were searched. One of the teams with a dog sniffing unit and another like right on the tarmac there, as if these players are going to be smuggling anything into the country while they're here to do one of the probably most memorable things of their entire life.
Yeah, it's like kind of beyond words. It's such a insult to the dignity of these like intense professionals. And then the Iran team that is like has to return to Mexico every night after they play.
Right.
What would like a non-corrupt World Cup look like? Do you think that would be possible, or would you need like a complete redoing of how a World Cup works?
Well, FIFA requires an enormous overhaul. And I think that's clear to anyone who's looked at the organization in a serious way. A lot of us thought that there might be improvements in 2015, 2016, when there was a big crisis of corruption that plagued the organization. But under current President Gianni Infantino, they've essentially gone the opposite direction. Instead of instituting meaningful reforms, they've sort of ossified their business model, where it's essentially a patronage network where, as we were talking about before, they hand out millions to these football associations, basically in exchange for their obedience. Whenever Infantino wants to do something crazy or cozy up to Trump, they're not going to say anything because they're getting all these millions of dollars. So reforming FIFA is no easy task. When people have stood up, such as Lisa Klaveness, the leader of the Football Association from Norway, they get isolated and they get told to just be quiet, and they don't get to have much of a say inside of the organization. There is an exciting new campaign that has just been created by a humanitarian group based in London called Fair Square, and they started a campaign called Reboot FIFA. So it's rebootfifa.com, and what the organization is doing is trying to get as many people as possible to sign on to a class action complaint against FIFA for violating its own statutes around getting involved in politics by giving President Trump the FIFA Peace Prize or attending the Board of Peace meetings and that sort of thing. So anybody could go on and sign their name to that. I should probably say, full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board for this organization, and I definitely signed my name, and so now I get the updates. Is the other benefit. If you sign on, you get updates on what's happening. We're going to take this to the FIFA Ethics Committee, but also take it to the European Parliament.
Wow. It's interesting also how FIFA is pretending that it's like an apolitical organization, and then you're giving the Peace Prize to these countries, or you're not even protecting your players from getting strip searched at the airport.
I think those two things are connected in the sense that the FIFA Peace Prize was a massive strategic blunder on the part of Gianni Infantino. Not because President Trump didn't deserve it, and he definitely didn't deserve it, but because he gave it to him in December, many months before the tournament started. If Infantino were thinking strategically, then he would have said, oh, we're going to give an award called the FIFA Peace Prize at the very end of the tournament, thereby giving Trump an incentive to be on his better behavior during the games and maybe not do the kind of things that you were just mentioning around keeping people out, around sending Iran back right after their matches. And that in itself is a massive blunder, what Trump is doing strategically, because in the last time there was a men's World Cup, the Iranian team, or Team Melli as they're known, stood silent during the national anthem, sending a message to protesters and others back home that they were not happy with the government either. And so by Trump attacking the players and making their lives difficult, there's no way anything like that is going to happen. So it's just like strategic error after strategic error when you're working with these people.
Do you think that the fiasco of the past several months, and now what we're seeing with all of these issues, do you think we're hitting like a breaking point with FIFA? And it seems like, at least the fans, there's this really widespread awareness that this organization is kind of a mess.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real awareness, like you're saying, that FIFA is a greed machine. And that's why we put it in the title of the book, because we saw it, and I think more people are seeing it, especially when you start looking at those ticket prices and how they've just escalated like mad.
Yeah.
I do think we're at a breaking point, at a certain conjuncture where you add this one with 2030, which will be in all these different countries. It starts in Latin America, and then it moves to Europe and North Africa. And then the one after that, 2034 in Saudi Arabia that we were talking about before. None of those will come without conflict. So I think we're entering a really interesting moment. With Gianni Infantino cozying up to Trump, an extraordinarily unpopular person around the world, he's taking a political risk as well. And I guess that's the thing that I find really interesting about sports washing as a general phenomenon, is that the end is not written in stone. It's all about the politics and the political battle. So sports washing can absolutely backfire. And that's what I'm hoping is going to happen this go-round with President Trump. He's trying to use sports to his political advantage, and he needs help right now. He needs a political win ahead of these midterms. He doesn't care about that international audience. Remember before we were talking about Qatar, they were talking to an international audience that they wanted to have come do tourism. Trump has made it clear he doesn't care what the rest of the world thinks. For him, it's about domestic audiences and getting votes in November. So the performative security theater we were talking about, with those guys on the runway from Senegal getting searched, or the Uzbeki guys getting sniffed by dogs, that's all just red meat for voters back home, where he can say, see, I'm standing up for you, keeping you safe, from these other people out there. But it's a political battle is what I'm trying to say. And it doesn't mean just because he's trying to sports wash that it's actually going to work.
Which is also why there's a kind of irony in him focusing so much on soccer, which is growing in the US, but like even in the US, it's so many immigrant communities that are like coming out. It's not something that is, as popular as the NFL or something.
Yeah, no, but it is now the third most popular sport in the United States. So you're right, NFL is number one. Basketball, when people are asked what is your favorite sport, second place is basketball, but third place is soccer. I mean, it's gone past baseball actually, which is supposedly the nation's pastime.
Wow.
So yeah.
Well, it's a very interesting time, and thank you so much for speaking to me and for writing this really excellent book.
Oh, thanks, Anna. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.